Hello, everyone. My name is Filiz Çakır Philip. I am the founding curator of Aga Khan Museum, which was founded in September 2014. I am also a board member of AMC. Today, with the distinguished panelists, we will be discussing an important and ongoing subject matter, namely the identity of Islamic art. Our goal is by no means to provide you with answers, but rather to ask the relevant questions and to explain how we interpret the term Islamic art in our own way and how we practice. You may rightly ask, what is Islamic art? How do we describe Islamic art? I wish we could have some simple explanations. Looking at the history of terminology, it shifted in the scholarly field from Muhammadan art to Mussulman art, and has, since the end of 19th century, been referred to as Islamic art. This change was not straightforward. Many Western countries had their own way to coin it. One of the major reasons was colonialism. Today, the term Islamic art is discussed and debated among scholars and creators of the field who conducted critical investigations concerning the whole term Islamic art, especially with regards to its formation, its colonialistic background, which includes Orientalism and nationalism. Each of these imprints differently on the field of depending on culture. For example, French scholarship has different approach than German scholarship, or British, etc., which provide variations by complicates and forces the field to build categories that eventually end up being limitations. Islamic art is condemned by the measure to be either iconoclastic or ornamental, just to mention a few of these limitations. What we witness today, how Asian art and culture is being politicized, is almost a déjà vu for the scholars and curators of Islamic art. We were challenged, questioned in the post-9/11 world. Our field was named terrorist art. A time of increasing Islamophobia. Why is that so? Artistic traditions identified as Islamic originated in diverse cultures, traditions, and civilizations, and developed through extensive trade networks and interactions. Often, but not always, artworks arose under the umbrella of Islamic faith and presented a certain unity in diversity. We face at least two problems herewith. First, any attempt to integrate Islamic material into the wider field of art history stems from the complexity of the term Islamic, clearly referring to the religion of Islam. This term aspires, especially in the academic, learned, and secular sphere, to encompass the entire cultural breadth of Muslim societies, rather than restricting itself to religious context, as pointed out by Oleg Grabar already in 1978. Secondly, the idea of the unity of Islamic art. One of the most harmful concepts developed by previous generations of Islamic art historians, out of the necessity to explain similarities between different artistic executions. Islamic art historians have been obliged to abandon their common operating model of diversity in unity. Since the idea of unity can no longer be taken for granted, we have been left only with the notion of diversity, as Avinoam Shalem describes it. Let me share my screen with you. Select. I'm selecting. Can you see my screen? Wonderful. With this complicated background of Islamic art in mind, I want to direct your attention to the museum's world, where I feel most comfortable, which has struggled over centuries to define its identity. This has especially in the last 2 decades, where we have witnessed restructuring and remaining in particularly with regards of departments. I previously mentioned I work at the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. The name of the museum was already established before I joined the museum in 2013. So I can only share with you with few aspects of discussions which led the patron and the advisor group to the decision regarding the choice of name. The museum could easily have been named Museum of Islamic Art Toronto or Arts of Muslim Civilizations. The general concern was that when the programming of the museum explores connections between diverse cultures, how can this be done in a museum with the name of Islamic art? In this particular example, as a designation referring directly to Islam or Muslims was considered as limitation for exploring diversity and pluralism in art. I want to give you some other examples of museums from different geographies, first Asia and the Middle East, before we return our attention to Europe and the US. In this slide, you see 4 different museums, 2 recently established and 2 historic. Museum of Islamic Art Malaysia, opened to the public 1998. Museum of Islamic Art Doha, opened November 2008. Museum of Islamic Art Cairo, which was established in 1884, and the staff consisted of 1 curator and 1 doorkeeper. Back then, yes?
Sorry, your slide is not going forward. Sorry to interrupt. It's
on your PowerPoint.
It is in my PowerPoint.
Slideshow.
You want to click on slideshow? Because now it's on preview and not going forward. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
So going back to Museum of Islamic Art Cairo, back then its suggested name was Arab Antiquities. The museum had many stages of renovations and extensions. The last renovation was completed 2010, only to suffer under a bomb attack in 2014. The last example in this slide from Turkey, another historic one. The Museum of Turkish and Islamic Art in Istanbul housed in a 16th century historic building and was established in 1914 during the last breath of Ottoman Empire. The name of the museum was changed after the foundation of the new Republic, Turkish Republic in 1923. As you can see, both historic museums in Cairo and Istanbul reflect the influence of nationalism, regardless of the non-existing homogeneity and the westernization. Looking at the Europe and related museums, I would like to begin with the Pergamon Museum, where I come from, which is an umbrella institution housing 3 different museums: Museum of the Ancient Near East, Collection of Classical Antiquities, and Museum of Islamic Art. The Museum of Islamic Art was founded in 1904, which was first as department in today's Bode Museum, formerly called the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, and then later in 1932 moved to Pergamon Museum as the Islamic Museum. The name of the museum was changed to Museum for Islamic Art in 1992. It is after the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo, one of the most important Islamic art collections in the world, and it is considered to be only museum as opposed to department in Europe dedicated to Islamic art. The idea of housing the Museum of Islamic Art under the roof of the Pergamon Museum, along with the two other major collections, was based on 19th century German cultural politics, supported by the colonialist approach of the archaeological excavations. In the early 20th century, scholars saw a linear between ancient cultures and Islamic art throughout the artistic development of humankind, which is still included in 21st century project planning of Berlin, including the so-called archaeological promenade, which crosses 4 different museums underground. My second example is the British Museum. It was founded in 1753 and has one of the most significant collections of Islamic art in Europe. It is kept in the Department of Middle East, and dedicated galleries were reopened in 2018. They now include contemporary artworks as well. However, only the artworks based on paper, with some acceptations from ceramic through the tireless work for its curator, Dr. Venetia Porter. The colonial agenda of the British Museum is obvious to any of us. I will only emphasize the role of Thomas Edward Lawrence, well known as Lawrence of Arabia, in terms of including archaeological findings from the Middle East into the collection. A third European example is in this regard is, of course, Musée du Louvre in Paris, founded in 1793. However, its Islamic galleries first opened in 1893. The so-called new galleries of Islamic art opened to the public in 2012, disregarding the connections to the previous cultures of the geography and with emphasis on its large ceramic collection. With one significant difference, the collection at the Louvre focuses on the display of artworks until the 19th century and do not include contemporary art. With regards to North American museums, I limit myself, as Linda will speak more about the collection of Lacma and its formation. It is necessary to emphasize the importance of encyclopedic collection of Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which celebrated its 150 years anniversary last year. The museum reopened its renovated Islamic galleries in 2012 with a politically correct title to Rehumanize Islam after the attacks of 9/11. The galleries for the art of the Arab lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia. This long title for the galleries shall help the museum and its curatorial staff without appearing too didactic and in the same time without losing sight of main objective, namely displaying art, not to explain a heavily struggling religion as commented by Nasser Rabat. Now, can this change of formulation underline the visual cultures of Islam? Is what Matt is offering us a partial solution for the challenging term Islamic art? Certainly, we need a new aesthetic language which can allow us to express the individual cultures, heritage, languages, and religions of diverse peoples of medieval East and elsewhere. As you may be aware, the Islamic department of Met is collecting contemporary artworks since many years as well. The Department of Modern and Contemporary Art also included a position of assistant curator for the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. I am curious when we can see the fruitful results of this collaboration between two departments. I can't help myself but ask the question of the modern and contemporary arts of the Muslim diaspora and exiled and their existence in our collection and galleries, and how to place and display them correctly. This question is inseparable from the question of being contemporary in our museum work. The formation of collections and the role of exhibitions, museums and libraries, the growth of the art market, and the emergence of scholarship brought us where we are today. The art of objects plays a major role in Islamic art, as Linda Kamarov suggested, a turning point in the study of art of the objects. In the context of historic and contemporary artworks, Christiana, Tamam, and Linda will provide us with their own view on this topic from the perspective of scholarship and art, from artist and curator. Thank you. Christiana, may I invite you?
Thank you, Filiz. Thank you for setting the stage and organizing this panel, Filiz. It's a pleasure to be here. So without further ado, let me begin my presentation, which will focus inside the academy and the classroom. The field and identity of Islamic art has evolved in pedagogical settings in the United States, Europe, and across the globe for over a century now. Within our university classrooms, the move from the sage on the stage to collective learning, and from the unilinear delivery of information to the multidimensional arena of integrated technologies invites us teachers to rethink our pedagogical techniques and learning outcomes. In my brief talk today, I wish to pinpoint how we can loosen received paradigms to overcome overly enclaved concepts and methods particular to our subfield. Forward, please. Historically, the practice of teaching Islamic art occurs primarily in the survey course. The survey acts as a threshold into the field, and it is typically organized chronologically through a succession of Muslim dynasties. Up until more recent years, a number of Islamic art galleries also were organized according to dynastic chronology, a temporal schema that my curator colleagues have noted as confusing and quite uninviting to museum visitors. However, within the classroom, the opposite seems to hold true. Students prefer a clear chronological structure to organize the learning of data. However, a temporal skeleton, be it articulated through the centuries or through dynasties, needs to be parsed into themes that are both historically precise and also cut across time. As an example, most professors begin their survey courses by teaching the Dome of the Rock, built in Jerusalem in the 7th century, late 7th century, and that's the structure you see in the upper left. It is considered the crowning achievement of the Umayyads, the first Islamic dynasty, and represents a fusion of Islamic, late antique, and Byzantine architectonic forms and decoration, above all in its mosaic work. You have to think of the exterior as having been clad originally in mosaic, just like the interior. Beyond pinpointing the particulars of this early Byzantino-Islamic architectural encounter, the pedagogue could keep in her sight the end of the semester, at which time the arts of modern and contemporary Islamic lands, even the diaspora, should make a strong appearance as well. If a teacher is, for example, to include Tamam Azam's work, such as Klimt's kiss stippling a bombed out Syrian building, which you see in the lower right, then much more can be said about tessellation, debris, Syrian art today, and inter-artistic exchange across regions and even times. Forward, please. Within the academy, Islamic art indeed has been moving forward by leaving behind a number of taxonomies and genealogies that are particular to the field of art and architectural history writ large. Experts of Islamic art have long bemoaned the fact that art history survey books tend to present Islamic art as if a standalone entity, sandwiched between medieval and Renaissance periods, thereby reduced to a perennial form of medievalism. Such problematic structures of data organization are detectable in Bannister Fletcher's famous Tree of Architecture of 1901. Here, so-called Saracenic, which is Islamic architecture, can be seen branching out of a Greek and Roman trunk on the right. I don't know if Filiz, you can point that out. Unlike the Romanesque, Saracenic architecture is depicted as splintering off, cast away, and begetting no influence on the architectural traditions of Europe and America. To state that Islamic art and architecture have been imbricated in global creative traditions would be painfully obvious for many of us. especially the professor and curator, for whom a prime pedagogical thrust is to present Islamic visual cultures as globally interactive and thriving until the present day. Forward, please. Chronologies and genealogies have given us systems of thought and practice, but they have also limited us to some foregone conclusions. Thus, in order to transcend some common configurations, I'd like to highlight the promising potential of struggling against structure. After all, structure often presents larger patterns and hence involves processes of simplification and discarding, which skirt complexities and nuances, often leaving non-majoritarian experiences and materials to linger in the field of the unsaid. But how to broach such topics when teaching the arts and visual traditions of Islam? One way would be to expand our geographical boundaries well beyond Southwest Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East. If Islamic art is indeed a global phenomenon stretching from Australia to America, then even the notions of center and periphery within the field of Islamic art proper must yield to pathways and interconnections instead. Forward, please. Above all, in our scholarship, classrooms, and galleries, the time has come to fully integrate Islamic art and architecture south of the Sahara, and even across to the Caribbean. Many art forms can be discussed, including Quranic boards, manuscripts, and architecture. These many expressive cultures can help explore the roots and trajectories of particular art forms for the faith as these travel across regions and interact with a number of non-Islamic religious and cultural traditions. Sahelian and Trans-Saharan contact, in fact, was a central topic of the Caravans of Gold exhibition that was recently hosted by the Aga Khan Museum. And it is one that requires articulation in the classroom that is not overly bound by geographical or temporal brackets as well. Forward, please. As an example, we can head to northwestern Ghana to examine an intimate mosque that was constructed in the town of Larabanga in 1421. The structure looks as if a series of termite hills, which are considered cosmic structures in various sub-Saharan cosmologies. Moreover, the mosque is constructed of piled mud, while its internal scaffolding and external studding comprise branches that are known in the Bambara language as Toron, the term symbolizing ancestral spirits. So the ancestral spirits are literally holding up this building. Here then, the mosque offers an occasion to construct and strengthen ecological metaphors that are quite specific to sub-Saharan cultures. Forward, please. The Larabanga Mosque's major feature, however, is not man-made. Instead, the structure includes a Baobab tree that marks the grave of Ayuba, the Muslim saint associated with the building's foundation. This element helps us alter our conceptual thinking for the history of Islamic art and architecture to take nature into greater account. In other words, to focus on vibrant matter and its contribution to the crafting of notions of the Islamic sacred. Forward, please. The baobab is a deciduous tree that is native to sub-Saharan Africa. It stores large amounts of water and thus functions as a reserve for thirsty animals. In addition, its leaves are used by humans for healing purposes, and for these reasons, it is often referred to as Africa's tree of life. Within traditions of Islamic art, it is thus important to not hypostatize Islam from nature. In other words, not to equate nature to paganism, because that's not the case. Forward, please. Another way to capture the diversity of the Muslim experience through art and architecture is to shift our attention away from imperial monuments and capital cities to minority communities living in rural areas. Heading out to agricultural lands of mainland Turkey, the researcher will come across Alevi shrines, such as the tomb complex of Abd al-Musa in Elmalı. Alevis are a minority community in the Middle East whose belief system brings together Islam, she motifs, and earth-oriented traditions. The shrine at El Nalı, for instance, includes not just the shrine of the Alevi saint nestled within trees, as you can see on the left, but also sacred rock formations to which votive candles are offered, as well as a large sycamore tree that embodies the verticality and thus the sacrality of Abdel Musa himself. Today, the tree, which you can see in the lower right, is covered with hundreds, if not thousands, of donative objects that often find themselves in a tug of war over what constitutes quote unquote orthodox Islamic belief and practice. Forward, please. When we expand our definitions and corpus of materials for Islamic art and architecture to make way for sub-Saharan Africa, rural lands, and non-majoritarian Middle Eastern communities, then perforce we must revisit the canon and face our blind spots. As a case in point, let's return to the Dome of the Rock. Beyond the structure's Byzantine Islamic plan and decoration, we now have to ask ourselves a basic question, and it is this: why is the building's centerpiece a raw, rocky outcrop? In other words, what makes this lapidary formation so important beyond being it said to preserve a footprint of the Prophet Muhammad as he ascended into the heavens one night? These questions, which are really ecologically oriented, are going to require some careful thought and serious examination in the future. Forward, please. For now, though, let's focus on the topic of Muhammad's celestial ascension, a major miracle that was depicted in Persian and Turkic painting for centuries. This 15th century illustrated manuscript shown on the screen depicts the Prophet Muhammad astride his human-headed flying steed named Al-Buraq, perhaps Felice can point out Al-Buraq for us, as he visits the inhabitants of paradise. And there's Buraq. Ascension paintings such as these are essential for teaching the figural arts of Islam and devotional representations of the Prophet to our students and to the public at large. And this in order to, in fact, jettison some narratives that we hear in the public domain about this subject. Forward, please. These paintings also provide a rich reservoir for contemporary artists, including Shaza Sharafuddin, who adopted this pictorial prima materia for her series entitled Divine Comedy. In her work, the Lebanese artist photoshops photographs of individuals belonging to the Middle East's LGBTQ communities into the manuscript's original paintings. Oftentimes, she selects Buraq as a hybrid animal in order to capture the in-between status of non-heteronormative gender communities, as well as to criticize violence against minority gender groups across the globe. Thus, within our classrooms and museums, we have to be prepared to create connective tissues between the figural arts, devotional images of the Prophet Muhammad, and even queer aesthetics across time and media. This takes care and finesse, but to my mind, it is well worth the effort, as the visual evidence reveals a highly dynamic complex that cannot be divvied up into neatly organized thematic and taxonomical modules. Forward, please. As we rethink the canon and bombard it with questions, we have to pave the way for newer themes such as ecological art and queer aesthetics, among others. One way to do so is to forego print publications. I'm not lambasting those, but there are other opportunities. And this is especially imperative in remote working and teaching in our COVID era. As we embrace integrated technologies, these will allow us swift innovation and diffusion, as well as structures of presentation that can change with the click of a finger. There are plenty of online resources, among them Khamsin, my online initiative dedicated to Islamic art that was launched just last October. Forward, please. When you visit the website, you will find multimedia presentations by diverse scholars worldwide of early Islamic textiles and eco-critical art, sitting alongside presentations of the Dome of the Rock and, please move forward, even street and mural arts dedicated to commemorating the memory of George Floyd. This tessellation of topics requires getting used to as a toolkit. However, to my mind, this relative amorphousness productively allows for what we might consider strange bedfellows to thrive in synchronicity. Through mixing and matching, these open-ended resources help us connect the dots between the past and the present, and to thrive without over-shackling ourselves to definitions and structures, a strategy that modern artists such as Tamam Azam embrace as well. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and Tamam, I cede the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. I would like to introduce myself as an artist who live and work now in Berlin. I was born in Damascus in 1980, and then in Damascus, and then moved with my family to a very small village in the south of Syria. I spent there my childhood discovering like my love for drawing and paintings through the landscapes around me. So it was like totally far away from the city, even the closest city, and from Damascus. When I moved to Damascus to study, everything like changed for me, like moving from a very small village to this city. It made me like feeling a very deep connection with the city itself, like the buildings and the streets and all the stories together. So in Damascus, I started to like collect things from the streets and to try to build this pieces of clothes, doing an artworks, talking about the stories of people behind them. But also like I felt like my work that time just looking for stories from today's, not anything like ancient or not anything about future. During that time, I was also working as a graphic designer for like 10 years in Damascus. And that gave me another experience, like doing things later with the graphic programs. So when I moved to Dubai in 2011, after the Syrian revolution, I found myself in Dubai like without studio, without physical materials I used to work on. So I felt myself like nothing to do except to do something with my laptop. And then I shifted my laptop to a mini studio and started to do photo montage for like 2 to 3 years. And this photo montage, I did many different series. The Syrian series, where I included like iconic painting from the Western art scene with backgrounds from Syria. Also in these two photo montages, they are from the Bon Voyage series. I tried to feel the journey of refugees or people around the world who lost their homes and the idea of like settle down somewhere. So this building traveled around the world, and I had this like background in New York, just like like the same story of people who died or who killed, and how can the whole media like remember something but ignore something else, but it's still like the same tragedy. After 5 years in Dubai, I get an invitation from the Hansewissenschaftskolleg here in Germany to do an artist in residency. So when I moved to Germany, I moved also to a small village, Delmenhorst, and I felt again like a deep relation with the nature. So I started doing paper collage by like preparing them and make this composition of cities or figures. I would like to add, as an artist who is coming from an Arab or Muslim majority region, I don't see a direct impact on my artistic career, but still like I keep like the whole time in my mind the light or the colors from Damascus or all the cities I lived in later. So yeah, thank you.
You are welcome, Tamam. Linda, may I invite you to take the floor?
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. And thank you in advance for showing my slides for me. If I can have the first slide, please. I'll get started. This should take exactly 9 minutes. For most curators, the collection is the enduring part of our work and the most important legacy. So I'm here going to speak mainly about Lacma's collection, as well as about how it impacted my thinking on the field of Islamic art and related exhibitions and installations by way of offering my sense of the identity of Islamic art. When I first arrived at Lacma, in what not only feels like, but literally was a lifetime ago, I already knew that the collection of Islamic art was a very good one of the best in the United States, with collection parameters extending from southern Spain to Central Asia, and from the 7th through the 19th centuries. Particular strengths included glazed pottery and tiles from Iran and Turkey, and Persian and Turkish arts of the book. The nucleus of the collection, acquired in 1973, was comprised of over 700 works, skewing mainly Persian. But as I spent my first year or two at Lacma learning, and especially exploring the objects in storage, I began to think about what it might take to transform a very good collection into a great one. I would like to think that I've come close to achieving that goal. It has taken 25 years. I've been extremely fortunate in having had the opportunity to reshape the collection and lucky in having been able to raise the necessary funds. I can mention here 3 main achievements in building the collection. 1, creating a larger and more comprehensive collection. 2, acquiring a singular and large period room. And 3, expanding the collection parameters. A few years after arriving at Lacma, through my instigation, we had the rare opportunity to purchase one of the most notable collections of Islamic art in the US, then still in private hands. This acquisition of the Medina collection would fill many significant holes in our existing collection, as well as effectively double its size. In fact, the 2 collections were a perfect fit with few duplications and with the possibility of filling many key gaps. Finalized in 2002, the net impact of the acquisition and the merging of the 2 collections was to create something much more comprehensive and geographically diffuse that also would allow us to more easily display both masterpieces as well as those quirkier objects that help sometimes to better reveal the humanity within. Next slide, please. And here quickly some of the important works from the Medina collection and other individual acquisitions that help to create this more inclusive and diverse collection. There was a clear paucity of art from Arab lands that has now been partially redressed, as you can see here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Other acquisitions deepened and expanded the holdings from Iran and Turkey. In this slide, dating from the 15th to the 17th centuries. Next slide, please. And in terms of southern Spain, which had not been well represented, several important works expanded this slim area, including the astrolabe at center and multiple segments from a late 14th to mid 15th century ceiling, both of which came in as gifts. The ceiling on the left is an ongoing conservation project. Just this section is completed so far. It will add a crucial architectural context to the collection. Speaking of which, next slide, please. Here's our 18th century reception room from Damascus, which we acquired in 2014, completing its extensive conservation in 2016. When I first saw it in a London warehouse in 2012, in spite of its dismantled circumstance and the decades of accumulated dirt and grime, I realized that the great appeal and importance of acquiring the room had to do with its overall condition. Removed from a home in a Damascus neighborhood demolished by the Syrian government in the 1970s, the room was largely in its original state, with well-preserved painted surfaces, including brilliant pinks, oranges, blues, and greens. Witnessing the transformation of the room from the condition in which I first saw it to its present state was one of the most exciting and gratifying moments of my curatorial career. But that joy was tempered by the sadness of the contemporaneous deterioration of daily life in Syria, the diaspora of its citizens, and the destruction of its historic monuments. I would like to think that whenever the room is on view at Lacma, it will, among other things, serve as an important reminder of all the lost homes and displaced persons. Next slide, please. I have written and spoken about my own personal epiphany regarding contemporary art of the Middle East so many times that I will not repeat it here. I will simply note that I began acquiring contemporary art for my department in 2006, with the enthusiastic concurrence of Lacma director Michael Govan, but of course without a budget. My intention in part was to provide a modern-day face to our Islamic art collection, demonstrating the deep connection between past and present, which is at the heart of an encyclopedic art museum. Of equal concern and quite apart from our historical collection is how the work signal the virtuosity and creativity of artists from the Middle East and diaspora communities, whose production is at once local and global. Though when I began, such work was scarcely represented at Lacma. My contemporary acquisitions were initially limited to works on paper, which were shown integrated with the historical collection, as here. As I ran out of space and expanded the types of mediums to include video, neon, and various other kinds of sculpture, I took over the elevator lobby adjacent to the galleries. When no one noticed or complained, I had the uneven walls recovered with drywall. Next slide, please. In 2015, while highlights from the historical Islamic collection began an international tour, we completely reinstalled the gallery spaces, and as you can see here, got rid of the blue paint. By then, the contemporary collection was large enough to allow for 2 successive installations over 2 years. Having spent so much of my curatorial career focusing exclusively on the work of long dead and largely anonymous artists, I deeply enjoy the contact and conversations with contemporary artists. Next slide, please. Through this connection to contemporary art, I have also developed a different understanding of time and how past and present, the twin polarities that frame the museum, intersect, overlap, and intertwine through art. This led in part to the 2018 exhibition In the Fields of Empty Days, the intersection of past and present in Iranian art, which eschewed the notion of linear time as a means of examining art. Here you can see from this shot of the installation, historical Persian, illustrated manuscripts, and 19th century photography and portraiture alongside contemporary works, drawing upon the same themes. Next slide, please. As our contemporary Middle East collection continued to grow, today we are closing in on 400 works. And sorry, Tamam, you will have to redress the wrong of not having you in the collection soon. And Michael Govan happily pointed out the large number of works by women artists. The ratio is about 50% female to 50% male. It may even be a little more like 51% female at this point. I had not been counting, but having been made aware of this parity, I decided to build on it with an exhibition specifically focusing on women, with about 80% of the works to be drawn from Lacma's collection. Often perceived as voiceless and invisible, these artists are neither. As portrayed in Women Defining Women, this fresh account will alter perceptions of women in the Middle East and beyond. More than that, it should prompt a Western audience to consider more fully the art of our time and the power of gendered images to define us. Next slide, please. I have also learned a great deal about the past by looking at the present, leading to a different curatorial perspective on Islamic art. I have come to see, and Christy noticed this earlier, I've come to see that the types of dynastic periodizations that punctuate the history of Islamic art are not necessarily the most useful way to introduce this wide-ranging material to a largely uninformed public, especially in the aftermath of 9/11. On that account, in 2011, I organized Gifts of the Sultan, the Arts of Giving at the Islamic Courts, which was centered on the universal theme of gift giving. Viewed through this window, the exhibition provided, I believe, a broad, nuanced, and layered view of Islamic art and culture, allowing visitors to integrate the objects visually and intellectually into the notion of a shared humanity. I am currently working on a cousin to Gifts of the Sultan, Dining with the Sultan, the Fine Art of Feasting, which will introduce our audiences to Islamic art and culture, only this time viewed through the lens of fine dining. After all, food defines us. You are what you eat. And by extension, how, when, why, and with whom we dine helps to characterize our cultural, ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic identities. At Lacma, as you can see on the right, at the Lacma venue, we will include our Damascus room to suggest the types of architectural spaces used for receiving and feasting family and honored guests. Next slide, please. Bringing us up to date, I am mostly looking forward to the Geffen Galleries, which as planned will be intercultural and non-hierarchical, mainly offering a non-linear perspective on the history of art. Next slide, please. For instance, we may have the opportunity to show these types of objects from my department in the context of a pan-Mediterranean gallery as a kind of cultural crossroads, emphasizing interchange rather than confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. I thank you all. I stopped sharing my screen and I have already seen we have many questions, but I want to ask one while I read and address the question. We have looked at from a scholarly perspective, museological perspective, and from artists. When I reached out first time, Tamam, to invite to this panel, he was hesitant. And I thought it could be very interesting to know in that regard why he was hesitant. So was it because I want to call this panel Identity of Islamic Art because you didn't feel comfortable, you were connected somehow, or how do you want to see your artwork and your the presentation of your artwork in museums and where?
Thank you, Filiz. Actually, absolutely, I would like to see myself like not connected to any kind of backgrounds, Islamic or other backgrounds, because I'm trying my best like to do artwork like without any kind of religious background. Especially I'm coming from an Arab country and like a Muslim majority. So yeah, I would like to have like a wide aspect for my work.
There is one question I would like to read loud. I realize there probably won't be time for questions, but here I guess I would be curious what the objections would be to an art of the Islamic world, presuming that we expand the ideas about parts of the world touched by Islam everywhere in some of the ways one of the previous panelists suggested.
If I could just answer, that is used by certain museums. And I don't know that there's any more objection to that than there is to Islamic art. Art of the Islamic world makes it much larger. And there are books titles that are called just that. It's not especially objectionable if you don't object to the notion of this kind of unity through Islam. And there may be, you know, given the diffuse nature of Islamic art, there may be people who would object to being called, you know, or having themselves located within that world, which would in fact be the entire globe, if you want to look at it that way. So I think that may be the issue. I'm leaving it up to a future generation to figure all of this out, because as far as I'm concerned, that train left the station a long time ago in terms of what the field was going to be called.
Christiana, do you have any comments on this?
I would say within academia, we face the same issues as the naming of galleries. And I know that some institutions prefer, for example, the art of Muslim civilizations or Muslim cultures, so that it's touched by Islam without being overtly or overtly tethered to religion. So some of the objections that you will hear, and we hear these all the time, is that somehow art produced in areas touched by Islam or with majoritarian Muslim populations are perforce religious. But within our field, you know, we've kind of gone over that hump, and we know that it can capture a really wide variety of experiences, both religious and not. I haven't seen any very ideal options, to be honest, to replace the very easy term Islamic art or art of the Islamic world. You hear Swana, Southwest Asia, and North Africa being used quite a bit these days. I'm not a fan of that expression either, but then again, acronyms don't do much for me in terms of onboarding general populations. So I'm just keeping the term Islamic art, but with the big caveat that all of us carry, and I just try to keep moving forward by expanding it in different ways as well. So for now, I'm like Linda, I'm leaving it to the next generation.
And I just want to point out this, Phyllis, you mentioned the renaming of the galleries at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to become geographical. In point of fact, the department kept its name, Islamic Art.
Exactly.
And when visitors are asking for that type of art at the museum's information desk, it's always, oh, the Islamic Art galleries are on the second floor south. So it's whether one tries to change it or not, it seems to be there.
Absolutely. I was just going to mention it because as much as we rethink the naming our galleries and display of our objects, the departments remain as they build it, so there is a tradition also behind the scenes. We call them how we used to. Christiana, there is a question for you. Were there any repercussions for the artist who inserted LGBTQ images in the illuminated manuscripts? What is her name?
Let me just close it. I was reading alongside. I'm unmuted, right? Okay, great. No, not to my knowledge. The name of the artist is Shaza Sharafuddin. She's based in Beirut, and you can look up information about her and see the entire series, the Divine Comedy series, up online. So as far as I know, and I've interviewed her, there have been no repercussions at all. So, and there will be soon a volume on queer aesthetics in Muslim lands coming out, I would say in a year or two, and there's new content that's being produced in the shape of scholarly articles and multimedia presentations. We'll launch one video on queer aesthetics on Khamsin in the next week or two by my colleague Sasha Krasnow. And she calls that intersectional liminality. So it's a growing subfield in the discipline of Islamic art, as is eco-critical art. Those are two big, I think, moves to keep our eyes on.
The next question, I think, Linda, I'm curious if you would like to answer. It was great to hear Christiana reflect on Africa's contribution to Islamic culture, visual culture. What do the creators think about how or whether to integrate Africa into galleries? As with Linda's presentation, one could imagine work from Sahelian and Western Sudan regions included in a theme of exchange.
Well, I think it would be great. Our own collection is fairly limited, and I'm attempting to redress that. one of the ways I have been able to address that, however, is through contemporary art. Our contemporary Middle East collection is not really Middle East. It's certainly global, and we have a considerable number of works from, at least so far, from Western and Southwestern Africa in the collection. It's a bit harder to at this state to begin acquiring historical art, but it's definitely on our minds. And in the Geffen galleries, it's something that we have already begun to think about. And not just in relation to Islam, but in relation to many other sections.
As far as I am aware about it, Linda, you were the first curator of America who started to collect contemporary artwork from Saudi Arabian artists, correct?
I don't really keep track of firsts or anything like that. I've been really fortunate with the contemporary component in that I had no limitations except for financial, and those I had to figure out how to deal with. So it was creating something out of nothing, and it was, I just went along with what I fell in love with initially, and now at least I have more of a focus.
Okay. I was just amazed when I started to study contemporary art in collections, and I found fascinating your bravery, so to speak. Another question is addressed to you, Linda. Do you create with an advisory committee or community members? How much of your work is relegated to your specific galleries, and how much is displayed throughout other galleries at Lacma?
Well, I'll answer the second question first, which is until recently, none. I think with the new building, as I suggested in my talk, we have the opportunity to be able to integrate what we call Islamic art into a much broader area. But previously, although there were certainly interconnections, it was very much siloed off. As part of our international tour, we sent some highlights from the collection to Saudi Arabia. And there we had a section on the impact of Islamic art in Europe. And so we were able to show European examples that were influenced by Islamic art side by side with Islamic art. And then the first question, do I have a committee? Well, I have not from outside the museum. We have the director, confer with the full group of curators, and then everything is approved by the board of trustees. I think, and I'm not used to talking to so many curators, but from a curatorial perspective, it's great to have that much autonomy, I think, in terms of what we acquire. And for us, the main limitation is we have no acquisition funds. So anyone, I'm great at fundraising, anyone who wants to contribute will happily accept your money.
We have 1.5 minutes left before we departure to another panel. I thank you all from bottom of my heart for participating in this panel and shaping in last 3 months with me the discussion around this very important topic with me. One of the comments is also thank you for including Azam in the panel and exposing his work. So that was also my pleasure, my private and personal pleasure. And I really think we will need to keep discussing and sharing concerns with each other. And as you said, Linda and Christiana, you are both involved in shaping the next generation, and let's see what they will come up with.